Emma paused on the porch, her hand tightening briefly on the railing as if steadying herself against a thought she dared not speak aloud. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms folded, trying to read her expression. She gave him a faint smile, the kind that looked rehearsed rather than felt. "Don't stay out too long," he said, his voice rough from the wine they had shared over a silent dinner. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment. "I won't," she replied, though the hesitation in her tone was like a crack in glass. The woods behind their home swallowed the last of the day's light. Damp earth and pine carried a scent of rain, though the sky remained clear. She pulled her coat tighter around her and stepped into the trees. Daniel stayed on the porch, watching her figure grow smaller until the shadows consumed her entirely. Something in her walk unsettled him. It wasn't hurried, nor was it casual. It carried a weight, a purpose. He tried to shake the feeling, telling himself she had always needed these evening walks to clear her head. Yet tonight felt different, as if she were stepping away from him rather than from the house. Inside, the silence deepened. Daniel poured himself another glass, waiting for the familiar sound of the gate creaking open, the crunch of her boots on the gravel. But the minutes stretched into hours. By midnight, he was pacing, calling her name into the trees, the sound swallowed by the forest's darkness. At dawn, a search party formed. Volunteers combed the trailhead with torches and dogs. Daniel followed close behind, his face pale, jaw locked as if bracing against something unspeakable. A shout rang out. A young man in a high-visibility vest knelt by the side of the path. "Found something." Lying in the dirt was Emma's phone, its screen cracked, faintly glowing with a missed call notification that pulsed like a heartbeat. The device was smeared with soil, half buried beneath leaves as though it had been discarded in haste. Daniel dropped to his knees, staring at it. His lips trembled, but no words came. The woods stood silent, offering no answers. Only the echo of her last smile and the haunting certainty that she had not returned. The detective who picked up the phone turned toward Daniel with a steady gaze. "We'll need to hear your version of last night." Detective Rowan sat opposite Daniel at the kitchen table, the early morning light spilling across half-drunk wine glasses. The room smelled of stale alcohol and damp wood. Daniel's hands twitched as he wrapped them around a mug he hadn't touched. She often went walking when she was upset, Daniel said, his voice uneven. It calmed her. Last night was no different. Rowan's gaze flicked to the wine bottles, then back to him. And what was she upset about? Daniel swallowed hard. His eyes slid toward the curtain, still drawn tight. Marital things, arguments, nothing unusual, but the narration of his own thoughts betrayed him. Their arguments had grown sharper, darker. Emma's silence had been colder than the night air. She no longer shouted. She looked straight through him, as if her love had hollowed out. He had begged, apologized, promised to do better, but her indifference gnawed at his confidence like rot. Neighbors soon filled the silence with their own stories. One recalled hearing Emma's voice raised in anger 2 nights earlier. Another described the sound of glass shattering, followed by Daniel shouting for forgiveness. Behind their curtains, the couple had become a shadow play of tension. Movements blurred but unmistakably hostile. Daniel leaned forward, speaking faster, as if to outrun suspicion. "She wouldn't just leave me. She needs me. She's fragile." His voice cracked on the last word. The detective's pen stilled. "Or maybe she needed to get away from you." The suggestion struck like a slap. Daniel's jaw tightened, his gaze hardening in a way that unsettled the officer. Silence stretched, heavy with unsaid truths. The dim kitchen seemed to close in, every tick of the clock louder than the last. Daniel's mind raced back to Emma's final look, that faint smile concealing something he had failed to understand. Was it forgiveness or farewell? Outside, the search continued, dogs barking into the woods. Inside, suspicion thickened. Rowan closed his notebook and stood, his expression unreadable. "We'll need to speak with those who knew her best. Someone will tell us what she was running from." Daniel's eyes followed him, wide and flickering with unease, as though the next name spoken might unravel everything he had left. Claire Ashton sat rigid in the interview room, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. A single light swung faintly above her, throwing her face into shadow. Detective Rowan leaned forward, his notebook open, Emma's name circled in heavy ink. You were her closest friend, he said. Tell me what Emma was planning. Claire's lips trembled before words broke free. She wanted to leave him. She told me she couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Daniel wasn't just protective, he was controlling. The memories spilled out like poison. Claire described how Emma's messages would suddenly vanish, how Daniel appeared at cafes unannounced, how he questioned every trip to the shops. Emma confessed he had installed tracking apps on her phone under the guise of safety. What began as concern had become surveillance. She stopped seeing most of us, Claire continued, tears streaking her cheeks. He pushed everyone away until she was alone with him. She said she felt like a prisoner. Rowan's pen scratched furiously, underlining the word prisoner. Later, Daniel was confronted with Claire's testimony. He sat across from the detective's, jaw clenched, fingers drumming against the table. She exaggerates. Emma was fragile. I only wanted to protect her. Rowan's tone sharpened. Protecting or controlling? Daniel's temper flared. His voice rose, and the carefully constructed mask he had worn since Emma's disappearance began to crack. She needed me. Without me, she would fall apart. The outburst left a ringing silence. The detectives exchanged a glance. His denial was firm, but the desperation in his voice suggested fear. Fear of losing her, or fear of something being uncovered. When Claire was informed of Daniel's reaction, she lowered her gaze. You still don't see it, do you? Emma wasn't just leaving a marriage. She was terrified of something far worse. She told me she felt hunted. The room chilled. Rowan leaned back, his mind already turning to the next step. If Emma had truly been hunted, then the woods were not just the setting of her disappearance, but the stage of something far more sinister. The woods lay heavy with mist, each searchlight cutting pale corridors through the darkness. Volunteers moved in a line, boots sinking into wet soil, radios crackling with static. The air smelled of moss and iron, damp with a stillness that felt wrong. Detective Rowan halted when a deputy called out. Over here. Pressed into the earth were two distinct sets of footprints. One matched Emma's boots, narrow, precise, and leading deeper into the trees. The other, larger, shadowed her steps, as if someone had been following at a measured pace. Rowan crouched, tracing the impressions with a gloved hand. She wasn't alone. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the mist. The line of prints ended abruptly near a cluster of branches. Hanging from one of them was a scarf, pale silk soaked dark with blood. The fabric shifted faintly in the night wind, fluttering like a signal no one wanted to read. Gasps rippled through the team. Rowan's jaw set. This was no longer the trail of a woman who had chosen to vanish. It was a path interrupted. Word spread quickly. Journalists gathered at the perimeter, cameras flashing. Daniel appeared before them, shoulders hunched, voice cracking as he pleaded for Emma's safe return. To the public, he was a broken husband. Yet in the privacy of the command tent, Rowan studied him carefully. Behind the reddened eyes and trembling words, there was something unnervingly still about his expression. Why would she bleed in the woods? Rowan pressed when Daniel was summoned again. Daniel buried his face in his hands, sobbing loudly. But when he lifted his head, his eyes held no tears, only a flat calmness that unsettled the detectives. Rowan stepped outside, staring back toward the trees. The footprints had told a story of pursuit, of fear pressed into the ground with each hurried step. The scarf told a story of violence, and Daniel's mask was beginning to slip. Rowan turned to his partner, voice grim. This isn't a disappearance anymore. We're looking at a crime scene. Detective Rowan spread a series of documents across the incident board. Among the photographs of footprints and the scarf now sealed in evidence bags lay something new. Statements from Emma's bank. A second account had surfaced, opened quietly in her name, hidden from Daniel. The deposits were regular, modest sums carefully accumulated. She was preparing for something, Rowan muttered. Or for someone. Further digging revealed another trail, emails buried beneath layers of encryption. The IT team broke through, revealing months of correspondence between Emma and a sender signed only as J. The messages began cautiously, almost formal, then grew more urgent, speaking of escape, safety, and plans to meet. Rowan read one aloud to his partner. I'll be waiting when you're ready. Trust me. J. The room chilled. Whoever Jay was, Emma had been planning to leave her life behind. Daniel was summoned once more. He sat rigid under the interrogation room's fluorescent glare, his face pale yet taut with tension. Rowan slid the printed emails across the table. "Did you know she was speaking to someone named Jay?" Daniel's hands tightened until his knuckles whitened. "No." The word snapped out, sharp as a blade. Rowan leaned in. "She had a secret bank account. She was planning something without you. What was she afraid of?" The mask of the grieving husband wavered. Daniel's breath quickened, his composure unraveling with each question. His reflection in the two-way glass caught the detective's attention. Eyes hollow, jaw clenched, lips twisted into a grimace of fury rather than grief. "She wouldn't do this to me," he said at last, voice cracking. "If she wanted to leave, I'd have stopped her." His fist struck the table, rattling the metal. The outburst sent a ripple of unease through the room. When silence returned, Rowan spoke softly. "Stopped her how, Daniel?" For a moment, Daniel's gaze burned with something primal, before he forced his voice back into control. "You twist everything." "I loved her." Rowan studied him, unsettled by the crack that had finally shown beneath the calm facade. The mystery of Jay lingered, but so did the impression of a husband whose love bordered on possession. The question now was whether Emma had been fleeing to another man, or from the one sitting in front of them. The interrogation room hummed with the low buzz of fluorescent lights. Daniel sat hunched, his hands trembling against the table, fingers twitching as though they wanted to grip something and break it. Across from him, Detective Rowan kept his voice even. "You knew about the bank account," Rowan said. "You knew about Jay." Daniel's eyes darted to the mirrored glass, then back. His mouth opened, then shut again, as though the words were stones too heavy to lift. Finally, he spoke. "Yes, I knew. But you've got it wrong. I didn't touch her." Rowan leaned forward. "Then why keep it secret? Why pretend?" Daniel's chest rose and fell sharply. "Because she was frightened. Not of me, of someone else. Someone who wouldn't let her go." The detectives exchanged a glance. Rowan pressed. "Who?" Daniel shook his head. His voice dropped to a whisper. "From her past. She never told me his name, only that he had come back. She said she could feel him watching." The confession was not a release, but another knot in the tangled web. Rowan studied Daniel, sensing both truth and manipulation. The line blurred so finely it was impossible to separate. Hours later, as detectives scoured Emma's belongings, a discovery surfaced. In the bottom drawer of her desk lay a leather-bound diary. Its spine was frayed, its pages filled with desperate handwriting that spiraled between fear and resolve. One entry stood out, dated only weeks before she vanished. "He's back. I thought he was gone forever, but I saw him. I cannot breathe when he is near. If Daniel finds out, everything will collapse." The entry ended with a name written with such force the ink had bled through the paper. Jacob. The diary trembled in Rowan's hand. Emma had been caught between two men, one she lived with, one she feared. The question now was which of them had reached her first in the woods. Rowan closed the book, his expression hardening. The hunt for Jacob would begin at dawn. The name in Emma's diary gave the investigation a new direction. Jacob Fenwick. Years ago, he had been Emma's lover before vanishing abruptly, after a scandal no one spoke of openly. His reappearance in her diary was not the mark of nostalgia, but of dread. Detective Rowan traced financial records, linking Jacob to cash withdrawals in towns that skirted the very woods where Emma disappeared. Surveillance footage caught him once, blurred, hood drawn low, buying fuel late at night. His face was hidden, but his presence was undeniable. Witness reports soon followed. A walker claimed he had seen a man lingering near the trail 2 nights before Emma vanished, standing motionless among the trees as though waiting. Another swore she noticed eyes glinting from the undergrowth, watching in silence. Both described the same unsettling detail. "He never moved until you looked away." Rowan studied the evidence on the board. A trail camera image captured in the forest showed a shadowed figure at the very edge of the frame. The photograph was blurred, almost spectral, but the posture, the tilt of the head, the shape of the shoulders, suggested a man who belonged more to the dark than to daylight. Daniel was called back in. When shown the image, his reaction was instant. His fists clenched, face twisting with a mix of hatred and fear. "Jacob," he spat. He ruined her once. And now he's ruined her again. Ruined her how? Rowan asked. Daniel's voice dropped to a growl. She thought she escaped him. She never did. The room thickened with the weight of implication. If Jacob had stalked Emma back into terror, then Daniel's guilt might not be as clear-cut. Yet jealousy, rage, and possession could have collided in the forest with devastating force. The woods no longer felt like a backdrop to a disappearance. They had become the hunting ground of a past Emma could not outrun. Rowan stared at the blurred image once more. Jacob was out there somewhere, hidden in the trees. The only question was whether Emma had met him that night, and what happened when she did. The forest gave up its secret in the cold light of dawn. Search teams moved carefully through the undergrowth, every step deliberate, until one called out with a voice that trembled. Beneath a tangle of ferns in a shallow hollow lay Emma. Her body was still, her coat torn, her face marked with bruises that told of a struggle both desperate and brief. The clearing fell silent. Even the birds seemed unwilling to disturb the moment. Crime scene tape fluttered in the pale wind as detectives stepped forward, torches illuminating what the night had hidden. Detective Rowan stood at the edge, his eyes fixed on the broken figure of the woman who had once smiled as she left her home. She never walked out, he murmured, the words carrying more weight than the silence around him. Forensic teams pieced together fragments of her final hours. Mud on her boots proved she had gone deep into the woods willingly, drawn there by the promise of meeting someone. Traces of another's DNA were found beneath her fingernails. It was Jacob's. When confronted with the evidence, Jacob's past unraveled like an old wound. Years ago, his obsession with Emma had ended violently, forcing her to cut him from her life. But obsession had a long memory. His emails, his lurking presence, his reappearance, they were all part of a plan to reclaim what he believed was his. Meeting him in the woods had been Emma's last gamble for freedom, but freedom had turned fatal. Yet Daniel's role was not erased. Detectives uncovered his silence, his knowledge of Jacob's return, and his refusal to protect Emma when she had confided her fear. Instead, he had manipulated, tightened control, and waited. By letting her walk out that night, he had allowed her to step directly into danger. Complicit not by action but by inaction, Daniel had watched his marriage dissolve under the shadow of another man, and when the truth came, he embraced the performance of grief rather than its reality. At the graveside, Daniel stood apart, eyes hollow, a faint smile twitching on his lips as if memory itself mocked him. Under his breath, he whispered the final words she had given him on that last evening. She smiled at me. The phrase echoed in his mind, not as comfort, but as curse. Emma's smile had not been one of love. It had been farewell, and he had never understood until it was far too late. The woods closed behind her that night, and with her silence came the end of them both.